So the commute today in was,
Yeah,
the traffic was
huge.
amazing, like
I just got the
it
train.
always is, like the Monash
We were on the
is
Monash.
crazy.
Oh,
and,
ridiculous. I had to
you
get on
know,
there the other
it's
day and
just ridiculous.
like,
The
well, when I got to go there
driving
tonight, so I'm going to have to
just
get on at
going
like
all
3
like,
o'clock.
Oh my goodness, how
But-
do you get back on it?
Well, I'm getting the train
It's
back to my
crazy,
place
like,
tonight, so
how
I'm
do we
just
even do
avoiding that altogether.
I
So.
don't even want to go on there. I actually should book my meetings where I'm not having to. Oh. Okay.
Hi, Simon Blair here. Welcome to another episode of Contact Centres Uncensored.
My name is Shelley Flett, and we're here to bring you cut-through conversations for leaders. Interesting intro there, Simon. You talk over a lot. Actually, yeah.
What do you mean?
So today's question that we're going to answer is, what are the critical components of a good conversation?
It's a great question.
It is a great question, right?
You're talking over me.
No? Was I talking over you? So, habit.
Yeah, and we've all got those ingrained habits.
No.
With some
Really?
Some of us do.
No. I never talk over people.
Talking over the top of people is
Ever.
a common thing that
Really?
we see. I'm often guilty of it myself.
No way. I just want to say what I want to say.
I know. Well, so do I. So it's probably why we're doing a video show, because it lends itself to our skill set.
Of course.
We like to talk.
Of course. In all seriousness, though, and that was on purpose. In all seriousness, talking over people is a lot more frustrating for some individuals than it is others. Would you agree with that?
You get some strong reactions from people, and then others doesn't seem to faze them. They don't even necessarily notice it. They just fall into sync with that. So
They just keep going.
Yeah, they just keep going. Maybe
like-
because they like talking over the top of people themselves.
And so you can have two conversations running at the same time, simultaneously, and for some people that's perfect and a really great use of their time. For others, it's an indication that you don't care about me and you're not taking my opinion seriously.
And it's, I suppose, a transference of energy, isn't it? So some people like that energy, that two people with high energy sort of, having that more passionate sort of talking over the top can generate.
And can listen at the same time as they're talking, so can
Yes.
take in. But I think that's only relevant for very light conversations. When you're starting to talk about the deeper structure things, you really need to give people space to finish what they're saying.
Absolutely. And look, in the case of the contact centre, because look, a contact centre is full of people who like to talk. Yeah?
Which is a good thing.
Which is a good thing, because that's, it's you're there to, provide communication over the telephone in order to facilitate sales or customer service.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you've got, staff with each other, managers with each other, managers with their staff with their managers. So there's lots of conversations that happen in the context of with the customer, in coaching situations, and just the ad hoc stuff in meetings. I suppose there's a whole lot of, especially around talking over the top and interrupting, and meeting etiquette is something to be really, really mindful of.
And so you can really apply the critical components. And, I suppose listening and not talking over people is one component of that. But one of the other things that I see is where you actually get the complete opposite and you don't get any engagement at all. So you say what you say and I am sitting here unresponsive. There's no verbal nods. There's no affirmation or confirmation that I'm understanding what you're saying, and very sort of blank reaction. And then you wait ages, and so you kind of fill in the gaps, and then you start rambling because, the person's just sitting there looking at me with a really kind of...
Sorry, can't hold it.
And it can be really unnerving.
Just passive. And those sort of, over the phone, you're always listening for those verbal nods from customers, and customers from you as well when they're talking. And face-to-face, of course, you've got those cues with the head nods,
you're nodding and the body language,
the eye contact, some sort of signal that we take in to give us a cue to, I should shut up now, keep talking, this is interesting the person, they're understanding what I'm saying potentially.
And it's a balancing act, isn't it? Being able to find the right degree of that verbal interaction and the physical communication with the person versus nothing at all.
Absolutely, and it's a real skill that you need to develop. And a lot of the work I'm doing with staff at the front line is in some critical techniques to enable more effective conversations with customers. I do a lot of work around the differences between face-to-face communication versus phone, and there are some critical differences because when you've lost, the visual, that's 70, 80, 90% of your communication gone, and all you've got is your voice. So the skill of using your voice.
So what would...
Are you talking over the top?
I know, on purpose.
Unbelievable.
So what would be your top 3 pieces of advice when speaking to someone over the phone? What do you believe the critical components when speaking with someone over the phone are? Just 3,
Well,
in order of preference. No pressure.
No pressure.
Go.
Clarity.
Clarity of message?
Because, clarity of speech. So whatever it is you're saying can be understood and interpreted properly. Because all you've got is your voice. So it's the most basic aspect of communication is, can I understand you? And traditionally that's been, I think, a bit of the legacy of poor service that consumers get with offshore call centres. Certainly back in the day, things have progressed a long way. Depends on the countries as well as to how much of an issue that is.
Yeah.
Because if it's hard for the person at the other end of the phone, the customer, then you have to make them work too hard to get what they need in that exchange of information. So clarity would be number 1 as your foundation skill.
Yep, I'd agree with that.
For phone communication, a massive one is pausing, the power of the pause.
After the customer has finished saying what they need to say, is pausing for a couple of seconds.
Yeah,
before
because
speaking
that shows a respect, and in fact that's a technique to eliminate the chance of talking over,
So how many seconds should you pause for if this is not something that I'm used to doing and I'm breaking a habit? Would it be 2 seconds?
Brief. So what I just did then, 1 second.
Okay.
But I think more importantly, the power of the pause comes into play after you as the person speaking at the time, you've said a key message, making sure that to maximise understanding and to create drama and intrigue in what you've said. So at key points in a conversation, when you get to that most critical point, you can change your inflection, the sound of your voice, make it a little bit more dramatic, and let that message sit there. And that pause creates introspection, gives almost allowable thinking time for the person at the other end.
Good.
So that's a massive technique, especially for sales. You sell in the silence is what the great salespeople understand. So power of the pause is massive.
And obviously, in the customer service side, being able to just slow it down and really focus on that.
Pace, and that comes into the clarity. And I suppose the third one would be checking in, a question to probe understanding. So because you've lost the nods, the visual cues, you have to, over the phone, be more proactive in checking, avoiding assumptions and making sure the customer is comfortable with the information you've just given them. So that's, how does that sound? Is that okay? Does that make sense? Are those little powerful sort of words that you do, questions throughout a conversation? And
so the questions that you ask, depending on where you're at in the conversation, can be either open questions or closed questions. So
Definitely.
At the beginning of the conversation, you're going to be asking more open questions to really get an understanding of what they know, how what you're talking about fits into their understanding. And then towards the end of the conversation, you're really narrowing the questions. So do you understand what's going to happen next? Being able to manage the expectations and what's going to happen after that.
So I'll ask you a question, Shelley, and to demonstrate the technique of open conversation, but also genuinely to find out from yourself. So Shelley, tell our viewers, when it comes to leaders within the contact centre environment, what are your thoughts on what's important in terms of communication?
I actually think the things that you mentioned apply to leadership. I really focus on that pause, and I actually encourage leaders when they do ask a question of their people that they actually stop talking for 5 seconds. So there's some research that was conducted by Dr. Mary Rowe on just pausing for 5 seconds after you've asked a question and allow them to consider what you've said and formulate a response without you interrupting their thought patterns. So that's probably the biggest.
And in fact, that's the critical technique in inbound sales, at the start of a needs discovery conversation.
Sure.
You ask open questions because you want to give the customer a soapbox to express themselves.
Absolutely.
So I'm thinking you want to give the staff member a chance to express, and the more they reveal and feel comfortable to be open, then you're more quickly able to get to root cause.
Absolutely. And, you know, when you consider that probably the number one cause of disengagement within teams is not feeling like you're heard. And it's not, I'm sure that from a leader's perspective, it doesn't, there's not the intention that you're not hearing your staff. It is that things are going at such a fast pace, you forget to slow down when you're interacting with them. And it really is, that's why I find the 5-second approach is really effective for them, because they can ask a question and then count to 5 in their head, and it becomes habitual, and then it just happens automatically.
So consciously think of the 5 seconds. Do that for, you know, today every conversation I have, I'm going to focus on that happening, and then very quickly that habit can just become a natural part of your dialogue. So.
And eventually, for those leaders that are comfortable sitting in silence, eventually it is asking a question and then not remaining silent for as long as it takes for the other person to respond. And so that could be, I've heard of people going up to 3 minutes, but it's a really awkward silence. And often they're wanting to fill that, but in order to get to a deeper level of conversation, that's the best way to do it.
It's a specific technique I've used in training sessions to demonstrate the pause, whereas the facilitator, I actually turn away from the group. I just start, doodling on the whiteboard and just literally go silent to demonstrate, create that awkwardness, and then eventually someone cracks. And because there's an innate need that we all have to fill the silence, and I think that's where that technique comes from.
Absolutely. And to identify any challenges or issues, even with customers, it is asking them a question and allowing them to answer it, and often that can diffuse conflict situations. So if a customer is unhappy about something, then asking them a question of what's important to you about this call today, and just pausing,
silence,
just letting them actually go in there, and gives them time to actually consider that as a question, and diffuses that conflict. So I think excellent. I absolutely think there's some really key core components or critical components of the conversation.
So don't talk over the top,
and definitely pause after you've spoken, and be very clear on what your message is, and probably not say lots of ums and ahs as well. But
that's silence. Being comfortable with the silence is a great way to avoid those filler words.
Exactly. So being comfortable with the silence people, that's the key. But thank you so much for joining us. Please like, comment and share. We'd love to hear your feedback and get your questions on your perspective. We've got some really good conversation and dialogue happening, which is great.
Definitely. Thanks,
but
guys.
Stay tuned for our next episode.
Cheers.